Hey everyone, welcome back to season 10 of Searching the Sacred. Lisa, Steph, and Jason here with you. We are diving into a season where we are looking at gardens in the scriptures. We started with a couple of conversations in the Garden of Eden, and then we talked about the third oracle of Balaam and Israel being compared to a garden planted by the rivers. And then most recently, we recorded about the Garden of Naboth, actually the vineyard of Naboth, that was going to be turned into a garden by King Ahab. And so we had a very robust, interesting conversation and left it very open for you to dance with at the end of that conversation. And so now, episode 5, we're going to be diving into a couple of different passages from a couple of different books of the Bible. And we're going to start with Isaiah chapter 58. Lisa, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to read verses 9 through 11, and I'm going to do it out of the New King James Version. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall be dark in the dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail.
Okay. I love this chapter. I like it. It is paining me that we only read a little section. So for those who aren't familiar with Isaiah 58, it's this like it starts out with people kind of saying like, "Where are you, God? Like we fasted and you haven't heard us. Like why are you not showing up?" And God responds with, "Is this not the fast that I have chosen to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free?" So there's a big driving towards acting justly over acting religiously that is in this chapter that's really beautiful. And this section then is like a culmination of that, of like, as you do those things, as you let the oppressed go free, then you will call to the Lord and the Lord will answer, and you will be like a well-watered garden, as it's kind of going through here. So I'm just curious what we noticed when Lisa read. What stuck out?
Well, I think I was just thinking about, as you were talking, is the that we need to place ourselves in the position of you as the oppressor.
Mm.
Like to just begin the conversation with understanding that we are oppressing others
Mhm.
in order
Me-
to read it.
If we are transitioning from last week's conversation on Ahab, part of where the prophets take the conversation is to say, okay, all of you have abused the power that you have had in this land. All of you have acted like Ahab. Um, and because of that, there's some consequences to those actions that you are facing through exile. But those consequences are for your healing. That's really where this chapter is going. It is not for your punishment, it is for your healing. And you have to let go of the oppressive action in order to find that healing.
Mm.
And more than just let go of that oppressive action. Like there's like these interesting things that you must do
Mm-hmm.
that feel actually harder than just not oppressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what are the specific things that we must do, Lisa?
I mean, extending your soul to the hungry makes me curious about like what that looks like.
Mhm.
I mean, to take away the yoke and the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness is a lot of probably some areas could work on.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it really struck me when the first response that Lisa had was that, well, we are the oppressors and we have to get our minds wrapped around that. I don't know why that like hit me because I just don't put myself in that position very often. Even though I know that, part of being a middle class or upper middle class person that drives a car, owns a home, lives in America, puts me in a position of power, puts me in a position of privilege, especially being a white male. Like, I know that there are ways of shopping and ways of thinking about things that just I probably marginalize with systemically with, without even knowing it. But also I just don't think of myself as like I don't think of myself this way. And so it was just kind of meaningful for that to be the first piece of this.
Mhm. Well, especially when I think about if I were to drop into a conversation like the theme of this season is about gardens. What we're looking at today is what it means for our souls to be gardens. I would assume, based on most conversation in modern religious contexts, that that conversation would then be about things like centering prayer or reading the Bible. Like our souls become well-watered gardens when we do those sorts of actions, when we fast.
Mhm.
And Isaiah 58 is actually saying, stop fasting that way. You become
Mm.
a well-watered garden when you reach out to the poor. When you reach out your soul to the hungry, when you satisfy the afflicted soul, when you take away the yoke, when you stop speaking vanity, that's when you become a well-watered garden. And I just don't hear that conversation happening very much. It's asking a very different thing of us than having a centering prayer practice. Not that that's bad.
Yeah.
It's just not where this passage is pointing to.
Yeah. Well, hopefully your centering prayer practice is leading you to this.
Mhm.
Right. In some ways, like those practices we're hoping line us up into something. Um, I don't know that I see, it's interesting. Because there's, in some ways, it's easy to distance ourselves from oppressive things. Like, I think about some of the conversations that I've had in the last little while, after, um, Marcellus was executed. And like, it's Missouri, so it's not Minnesota. So like, what are we gonna do about it?
Mhm.
And it's a really fascinating look at our justice system overall. And so sometimes we distance ourselves from the thing that's actually alive and well next to us. And so like I can say like, well, Minnesota doesn't shackle while women are giving birth and Wisconsin does. So but again, that feels like that finger pointing that the beginning of the passage like warns us about, because
Mm.
it feels really natural to do the thing of like, oh well, I'm not doing that.
Well, at least we're not that bad.
I'm
Yeah,
not that bad. I'm not doing that.
Mhm.
Um,
that's good.
it's just like I just think it's interesting that it does feel kind of like that lead up of to be careful to not point that finger and to take that honest reflection of like where, and to be clear, it's not like it's we all have areas because we all have power someplace.
Mhm.
And when we have more power than another person, that really is the spaces that get very ripe for um all kinds of things. I mean, it's one of the like what's fascinating in the prison is that is one of the things that is the most talked about. The thing that I've been most trained by administration is about PRIA, and like the very clear and identifiable thing that you have power in here as a volunteer. Every person who is incarcerated does not have power, and that means they are vulnerable. So you have to be aware.
Mm.
And I wonder about like where in our lives we need those kinds of warnings of like you have power here, you have to be aware.
Do you know what it reminds me of?
Mm.
My undergrad is in social work, and I had a class where it was about doing interviews in the social work system and about being being aware of that power dynamic. When you are working with a client, you have power over the client. So the whole premise of the class was recognizing your power and interviewing clients well to actually get at what they needed. As a part of that class, the instructor had us watch a video of a politician who didn't do very well in an interview. And we were supposed to be like analyzing the interview and the interviewee and like, but the video ended and the professor started making fun of that political candidate and that political party. And I was like, you have power over this class. You can't do what you're like, you are. But it was sort of the assumption. I mean, it was a Republican candidate, and it was sort of the assumption, well, anybody in this, there was an othering of this Republican candidate. But I was like, you're actually going against what this class is about by not recognizing that you have power right now, and you shouldn't do that. Like you can't. It doesn't matter who it is. You making fun of someone in their interview right now is completely against what this class is about. And it makes me think about like what you're saying, Lisa, that brought that story to mind. But like, do we recognize the power that we have when we have it? How are we holding it? How are we using that power to bring freedom and healing and food to the hungry, removing of the yoke? Because I also think about like this, there's this language in here that's removing the yoke. Like what in any setting where I am, where we are, where do we have power to remove the yoke that other people are having to carry, the burden that they have? And oftentimes we do have some level of ability to do that. Are we?
Yeah, like the when I work because I work in a field of connecting people to resources, like resourcing folks that are coming out of prison. Oftentimes I'll have friends, family, different people will ask me like, do you know of a resource for this person? Like, I know this person. Do you have a resource? I'm going to connect you. Can you help them? Which is not wrong. But oftentimes it's sticky. It's, as much as everybody thinks there's just resources for everyone, it can be really difficult to find, like ways to help people not be evicted or ways to find guests to go to work. And what is interesting to note is some folks then turned into like, well, can't help you, sorry. And other folks are like, you know what? If there's nothing out there that can help you, I got you. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about if we get presented with folks? Do we know folks who need help? Are we in spaces where we could encounter them through work or community? And then are we open to being are we able to hold the yoke? Like, can we remove that yoke when when we can see that kind of situation? Or buy groceries for the week or whatever thing it might be. Because I think it's really easy to just tell people to just go figure it out. Like, there's resources, go apply for emergency assistance. Mm-hmm. Well, if you've never done that, you don't know what that means and how actually not everybody qualifies for that. So I don't know. I just keep thinking like this is a very interesting reflection for me of thinking about when we have power, when we have privilege, when we have an ability to do something and how we make the decision to do something or not. Like how do we make decisions? Because this kind of feels like it doesn't feel like there's a lot of decisions that like feels kind of like, well, this is what you do. This is what your life looks like. And what if the church looked like this? I'll just say that.
Ooh. Right? What if this was the roadmap for how churches chose to operate, chose to think about their budgets, chose to think about what the meaning of ministry is, chose to figure out, I mean, it actually doesn't sound wrong. Like the preferential option for the poor, right? Like for those on the margins, those that are in the prisons, those that are disenfranchised, oppressed. What if we just said, yeah, those are our people and we want to be seen among them and alongside them, learning from them, assisting them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, but and maybe this is where we get all nerdy with the Hebrew and stuff, but the word yoke, it's not just like an imagery of like oxen putting a yoke on to like till a field, but also the yoke, wasn't that often like the teaching that was handed down to people? I think in Jesus's time in the first century, the yoke of the Pharisees was a heavy burden that they placed on people, where Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And so he was maybe a compare and contrast between Jesus and the Pharisees. Whereas, could this be like, stop putting so much religiosity on everybody, and instead just like stop pointing fingers and just get to the business of helping each other out?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of yoke in general, how it developed as a metaphor is one conversation, but the other is just how farming worked. And so the idea of a yoke is that, like, two oxen need to plow a field together, and the yoke connects them to each other, or the yoke might connect them to the plow. But part of then why it becomes a metaphor for teaching is that if you buy a new ox, the ox has to learn how to plow your field. The ox needs to learn where the edges of the field are where you walk. And so they take a new ox and they yoke it to the experienced ox, and that is how the new ox learns the field. And so that's where, like, the language of Jesus makes sense, where he's saying, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Like, he's not saying the yoke in that case, he's not saying break the yoke. He's saying, "Yoke to me. I'll teach you how to plow this field of being human.
Yeah.
I'll help you do that. I'll help you know the edges. I'll help you know what's yours to do. Yoke to me. That's the right yoke." Here, the language is break the yoke. It's the wrong yoke. You're connected to the wrong thing. There's something that is actually holding you back from plowing the right field in the right way that's actually going to lead to the flourishing of humanity.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I like that differentiation between the yoke being either heavy or hard or difficult versus easy, as opposed to, oh no, this is the wrong, you're attached to the wrong thing.
Break that
And
yoke.
yeah, you need to remove it, you need to break it. Because the ramifications are, you're going to be destructive, right? Because I'm guessing that a pair of oxen that don't know the field, that get attached to a yoke and just start going, they're going to do more harm than good for the long-term vitality of that farm.
Mhm.
They're going to cause more pain for that farmer, and potentially that community, if it doesn't have the food that it needs in the long run.
It reminds me of, like, if you place a burden on somebody who is already burdened,
Mm.
like, to add to you're adding to the weight of what they're carrying, um, when we make things really difficult for folks. That it like, it's just it's a yeah, like, I'm
Well,
not
that
the it's not about weakness,
Mhm.
it's about, like, what they're already carrying.
Right. And
Which
and I
Go
was
ahead,
gonna
Jason.
I just want to jump in because I think there's a really important example happening right now politically, also in a systemically, and we touched on this a little bit in our last conversation. But the free labor that has often been had by people that are incarcerated,
Mhm.
whether it's, farming, or whether it's, it's, all the tons of free labor, cheap labor. There's movement in some states to actually get rid of some of that language about being able to utilize the labor of incarcerated people, so that if they are going to work, they get paid a wage.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, if you were to tell me, hey, you're going to go do this job for the next 5 years, 10 years, by the way, you're not going to get paid for it. And then we're going to expect you in 5 to 10 years or longer, 20, 30, 40, to just show up and be a fully functioning member of society where you've not had the ability to earn anything. Um, yeah, that's putting an undue burden on someone who already has a burden. Um,
Well, to be fair, they pay them a quarter an hour.
a quarter. Like legitimately, that's actually a real thing in 2024 that people get paid a quarter per hour.
Yes.
Like that's not a joke. Like I'm not like
No, that's
involved
not
enough in
true.
this.
No, they don't. Very few have jobs that are over $1 an hour. Very, very, very few.
So
Like,
if I work
like,
an 8-hour day, I got paid $2 for that entire day.
yes. And then you can buy your $6 toothpaste.
People on YouTube, you can see my facial reactions to this. For those of you on the podcast, you're hearing silence because my face is doing all the talking. Like we're gonna get the little E.
Well, we don't.
We're gonna get an E next to this one because what the fuck is going on?
Well, this is how it works. And this is the thing.
Works,
This is
Lisa.
how the
I know.
system works. This is the system. This is how it's designed.
Yes, it is.
This is how it's designed.
Yep.
And there's a Stillwater prison, which is a max facility here in Minnesota, used to have a lot of industry to it. And then a horrific thing happened where a guard was killed by someone. And the system responds really strongly to those kinds of things happening, or any violence towards somebody who is employed there. But it doesn't bounce back. So like what's happened is they lost a ton of industry, which is actually a lot of the jobs that were like skilled labor. So what a lot of folks in both the men's prison and the women's prison that I work with, a lot of them actually work in the balloon shop, which has taken me a long time to like understand. But for me, I can't imagine. They're counting, like when you go to buy the balloons for like you're blowing up for the birthday party, there's like 10 in a pack. They're putting balloons in packs. They're packing balloons. That's what they're doing. That's their job. They'll get a quarter an hour for doing that job. And they have quotas that they need to meet. So they have to be quite productive. But that's the job. But that's also the only way they're getting out of their cells. So like if you don't have to work if you don't want to, you could lay in, but then you're not getting out of your cell. So for some folks, this is the only time they actually can get like out and do things. And so they sign up, they'll do that job. But it's neither skill producing, really. Like I still am quite fascinated how it is cheaper to employ incarcerated folks than it is to just put a machine to work.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking like a machine seems like it could do that.
I'm both grateful that they have a chance to do something
Mhm,
and horrified that this is the only option.
mhm.
I mean, there's a
Yeah,
couple other options, but like
what does that say about a society where like two things? One, that exists, and then two, I mean, how many people know that?
Mhm.
How many people know that?
not
Like,
many, because mostly what we're concerned with is people being punished.
well, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Might be, yeah. Like the fact that we
Not
live in a society where that even exists is atrocious. The fact that we live in a society that does that and we don't even know about it is just mind-boggling. I feel like horrendously guilty. Like the fact
Mhm.
that I didn't even know any of this, and it's happening like 40 minutes down the road.
Mhm.
it is
Makes
how
me
the
kind of want to
prison
throw
industrial
up.
complex works. It's like you
It's
can,
like it's like
yeah,
you know something's bad, but then like
yeah.
when you start hearing more about it, you're like, what? Like it's it almost makes me want to go, Lisa, come on. That's not like that the system's broken, but it's not like humanely stupid.
Oh,
But I know it is like, oh my
I
gosh.
don't say it lightly when I say that the folks who are incarcerated are the most oppressed people group inside of the US. Like, and by design, that's part of the punishment. That's part of the thing that's happening. Like but there is not another place where you find all of your rights stripped away and your worth stripped away, your name stripped away. your clothing, like everything that's an identifying marker for yourself is really stripped away. And then you're at the mercy of, like, it's it doesn't matter if you do good the whole time you're there. You could literally be incarcerated for something, and you could take all the classes, you could do all the work, you could get into therapy, you could get into leadership positions, you can do a lot of really good stuff. And it's really hard to even have that matter. Because if somebody else screws things up, everybody's getting locked down, doesn't matter. Everybody's locked down. If you don't get special privileges, there's not you don't get a reward. Like you run as a community, which is a very interesting way of looking at community. Like when one falls, we all fall. And we all have to succeed so that we all succeed, is an interesting way of community.
There's something
can't do that.
there's something truly beautiful about that, right? If one falls, we all fall. The irony is that when someone has committed a crime and this is their quote unquote opportunity to be rehabilitated, we isolate them to the point where we don't really even want to advertise what they're doing there because it's so inhumane. Wow. I mean, if one falls, we all fall. That's not how the rest of us operate. If you fall, I say, see you later. Go learn what it means to be a part of a community, because when you come back out, you're going to have to forget it all again and fend for yourself.
Well, that does go back to the language of yoke being used. It is a system where everyone is yoked to each other. And so that takes us back to verse 6. And just what it is, it actually uses the word yoke twice in verse 6, where God is saying, is this not the fast I have chosen? And all of the language here is just really, I'm going to slow it really down to here, to patah, which is to open, patah, the bands, which is like the
Like
pangs,
handcuffs.
the hands,
like the handcuffs,
like the handcuffs of wickedness, which is particularly, there's a few different words for like evil or wickedness in Hebrew, which is interesting. As much as there's a lot of Hebrew words mean multiple things. There's a different kinds of words that mean different sorts of wickedness. This particular one, rasa, is about wickedness that is a violation. So loosen those handcuffs of violating other humans. Undo the heavy yoke, the heavy burdens. There is a word yoke there. Undo the yoke that is heavy. It is binding. It is bunched. It is too tight. Let the oppressed go free and break. Now, instead of just opening, we're breaking, we're pulling out, we're tearing off, natak, every yoke. This is step one. Get rid of it all. Like you are just so caught up in this bounded up way of violating other humans, of oppressing other humans, of putting on burdens to other humans that is not theirs to bear. The first fast that I require of you, says the Lord, break all that shit up. If we like, stop it. And that is, in fact, a fast, because that would require a sacrifice from all of us to stop benefiting from the system that treats people that way. So it's interesting to call this a fast. This will require something of you to be a part of a system that breaks all that gets rid of all of that. And then the motion is to deal your bread to the hungry, to bring the poor into your house. So it's not just go feed the poor, it's bring the poor into your house. So the motion in Isaiah 58 is really making it personal. When you see the naked, cover them. Don't hide yourself from your own flesh. The naked person is you. You are the naked person. Cover that person. Like this, it's just getting so personal. Then your light will break forth as the morning. Then righteousness will go before you. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you shall call and the Lord will answer. And then it goes back again to break those yokes. Stop speaking vanity. Draw out your soul to the hungry. Then you shall be like a well-watered garden. there's some work to do here. There's a lot of work to do here.
Well, we always focus on what it's going to cost us. But like what this is alluding to, though, is that it's the well-watered garden. It's how you get there.
Mm.
Like giving up those things, to giving up well, I feel like this is a passage for abolition, but that's just, I'm just going to say that for a moment. Because I think there's this idea that, like, what are we going to do with violent people? But like, what if we don't think about violence as the way to solve all the issues? Like, what if it's actually about caring for each other? It is the removing of the burdens of the yokes. It's getting rid of those things that make everything so damn difficult.
Well, it makes me think about like, I'm not quite sure if this is where you're headed, Lisa, but like we think about how hard it is instead of what we will get for it. And there is something we're losing by being a part of this system. And like the conversation in the last episode was about Ahab wanting to plant a garden that's built through trampling. Through it's watered through the feet. It's through oppression that garden grows. And now it's saying, if you do this, that's when you become a well-watered garden. And it makes me think about how we long to be well-watered gardens. We long to have that contentment. We long to have a fulfilling life, a purposeful life, a meaningful life. And we try to get there by building a garden that is built on trampling and oppression. And that God's saying that's not how you get there. You get there through breaking yokes, through understanding how to have a field that brings human flourishing. And then you've got light, and then you've got waters that don't fail. That's how you get what you're looking for, is being towards the flourishing of all.
Yeah.
We're hurting ourselves as we hurt others. Is like there's a feeling here that I get of like God almost being like frustrated, yes, but also like sad. Like you guys, you have the potential to be a well-watered garden. You have the potential that your light rises in obscurity, that your darkness is the noonday. You have the potential to be a spring of water that doesn't fail. Like, choose that.
It reminds me of like, I think we know about some of this because we have these conversations around healing like generational trauma, conversations around like it's gonna stop with my family. Like I'm gonna make a change in myself and in my family so that I don't continue to perpetuate something down the road. So there's something that we understand. We actually understand part of this conversation. We just have this idea of it's like we haven't pushed it into play for things outside of our family or outside of the things that are just right inside of our own space. Because I just imagine, like, what would it look like if even like 25% of folks who come out of, like, almost everybody comes out of incarceration, 99% come out, they're released, they serve their time and they come out. But what if like half actually got like restorative healing? Like, what if they came out of prison like well-watered gardens? Now, maybe that doesn't necessarily impact my house, but I sure in the hell know that it's going to impact a community. And that's going to impact actually multiple people inside of a family and in communal lines. Like this weird idea that like that's not that doesn't have that kind of like incredible ripple of actually like doing some of that stuff now, and it pays off dividends. I mean, not to mention, like, when we start talking about like recidivism and all other kinds of things, like this is a very like prison justice like forward conversation, but also like how we treat the imprisoned and we treat the poor is the best reflection of like who we are as a society. So how do we treat people?
Well, and it makes financial sense. I mean, if we want to just get brass tacks with it, it costs way more to incarcerate someone than it does to like give them the resources needed to thrive in a society. Yes. And like, I mean, if you want to throw your tax dollars away, make it really hard for someone to succeed after coming out of prison. Like, because if they're going to go back, it's just going to cost the state way more which is just going to increase taxes. I mean, like, our system is it's we're afraid, and therefore we want to shove our problems away.
Mhm.
And what we don't realize is that not only are we harming people, which is like you said, Lisa, the way we treat the most vulnerable is a reflection on who we are, but also it just harms us.
Mhm.
Like, it just makes all of us worse.
I'm curious about other examples because there are multiple. For
Mhm.
those who are having a hard time as we're spending time on this one, I wonder about expanding it out to other examples that we see where we are choosing not to break, where there are yokes that need to be broken, where we're holding back our own communal healing through the yokes that others are bearing. And I do think, I mean, I'm thinking as you named the generational thing, Lisa, like it does in verse 12, it talks about generations that like once you're a well-watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters don't fail, then you're going to be the builder of waste places. You're raising up foundations for the generations and being called repairer of the breach. Like there is something to that repairing.
Mhm.
There is a generational thing that's happening here when we choose to be the repairers in our generation. It does something for the future.
Hmm.
It is, well, still going to be a prison example.
It's
But
where you
like,
spend your time. It's a good example of what happens, though. I mean,
well,
for those
it,
listening, so I do think this is a good context for the listeners to think about in your own life. Where are we proximate enough to an example that we would be able to be like Lisa and keep bringing it up?
yeah.
Because there's a way that it's an example to those of us who can't think of examples. It probably means we're not proximate to things that are actually going on in this world. So what are you proximate to? What example comes up in your mind? What's coming up in this conversation comes from Lisa's experience. Hopefully we're all having some of those experiences where we're proximate to people who are oppressed or being violated or injustice, and we're part of helping and healing them, which means their examples come to mind. If their examples don't come to mind, that goes back to this conversation being geared towards us as oppressors. This is to say, what are you then going to do to get proximate to know what's actually happening in the world? Okay, go ahead, Lisa, with your incarceration example again.
That makes me think of two things. So like one, well, part of my job is we work with folks and create like a one-to-one mentoring friendship. And that is, I think, a significant way of like what we recognize is the importance of having a friend,
Hmm.
having a person that is for you and shows up for you and cares for you and listens to you. It's not about money. It's not about, what it is about being a friend and how impactful that is in people's lives.
Hmm.
It cannot be understated what it means to be a friend. And I think that goes beyond just prison. I think really being a friend to folks who aren't like us, who are different, finding spaces for those things. But it also makes me think about if I look at like some like undercurrents, I think about like for like folks who are in violent relationships, like how to get out of violent relationships. How do we support that? Folks who are trying to do that. Single parents. Who is a single parent in your life? How are you participating with them? Is there a support that they need?
Hmm.
Because for some single parents, it means they're single parenting 100% of the time, and what it means to have a weekend in the month, um, or somebody mow your freaking lawn, or take care of bagging up the leaves. Like, not like, it doesn't have to be so extreme, but I think thinking about like what are burdens that are
Hmm.
unnecessary or that maybe we don't have, maybe we're not in touch with those things. Um, I don't it reminds me a little bit of like also like folks who are in medical situations
Hmm.
when they can't work or their child. needs care and they need to be there to care for their child. Um, like stepping into some of those things that like are hard and awkward to step into when we don't not not great with grief, not great with loss. But that's when we need
Mhm.
people.
Mhm. I think it's really interesting to me that this chapter uses the word soul so often
Mm,
because it's not really very typical. Um, and it kind of I think it kind of goes back to the Garden of Eden conversation about Genesis 2, that it's um, draw out your soul to the hungry, satisfy the afflicted soul. And then God will satisfy your soul in drought, and you'll be like a well-watered garden. Jeremiah 31 talks about our soul becoming the garden, the well-watered garden. And soul is nephesh. We talked about that in Genesis 2, that our nephesh is from the dust of the earth. And nephesh, soul, is not spirit, it is all of who we are.
mm.
This spirit and body and emotion and mind as our soul. And there's something about that in this conversation that feels so connected to, like, you are all humans are from the dust of the earth. Like, help the other soul, help the other earthlings.
Mm.
Mhm.
That's how you stay who you are and how everybody becomes a well-watered garden. There's something about the soul language that feels so, that keeps it in that personal realm, like you're talking about, Lisa, of like, well, do you know a single parent? Like, who do you know that's just got an extra burden that you can break, that you can reach out to? And this idea of like drawing out your soul to the hungry is so like, get out of your backyard and into your front yard and into your neighborhoods and into, I don't know, run for city council, theoretically. Um,
Theoretically.
theoretically, Jason for city council in New Brighton. But like, are you coming out from your cocoon with, is your soul so far back that you're not with others, that you're not seeing other, you're not reaching out to others?
Well, it's like that, like the opposite of all the advice from like, I feel like when I say Tony Robinson, I don't know if that sounds probably not, I shouldn't say his name. But like there is this adage of like who you surround yourself with is who you're gonna be like, right? Like so we should always have like we should always be geared to like finding like the most amazing people who are
Mm,
super successful and have everything together. That's who we should be friends with. Let's just, we don't want to waste our time with this. That it's a it is really interesting when we hear those kinds of rhetorics of like, what kind of community do we dream up for ourselves? Do we want to be in a gated community where like nobody from the outside gets in? Or like, is that the kind of community we want? Do we want to actually have like a flourishing of diversity? Because like uh, it's also like it's the conversation around like immigration. And my son is doing a speech right now for one of his college classes, and it was it's a really interesting thing to just think about even in my family, like what it's like to celebrate what we have brought into the US that is still like a part of like now the fabric of the US, as our family immigrated, and how many things that are part of the US come from uh, people who are immigrating here, and how can we celebrate that instead of like demonize that, for folks who are feeling horrific experiences? How can that be a celebration of who they are? And I saw this meme that was talking about um, what they were concerned about with the conversation around of Haitian immigrants in Ohio was that nobody was saying, "How come these immigrants don't have food?" Like the rhetoric that everybody got taken away with was a crazy conversation. But really, what the question should have been is like, do they have enough to eat?
Mhm.
Is that our gap? Like
Right.
to actually like get into the thing, like, oh, that's the right question.
If the facts the facts have obviously been disproven, all the
Yes.
original rhetoric around eating pets and all that bullcrap. But if the facts had played out that way, which people were acting like that was the truth, then why is that being demonized as opposed to seen as oh my gosh, we're America. People should not have to eat pets. If that's what's happening, then there's something wrong with the systems of our world, that of our place, where people have to resort to that. Like, yeah, there was a lack of empathy on so many levels. Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation that we're having, because I it's so needed, and this passage doesn't shy away from the fact that it's hard. And like, because it even says, like, when there's droughts, like, you will have water, but it's like, it doesn't say there won't be droughts anymore. It'll all just be up and to the right. Everything's great. Like, don't worry, once you start feeding a few, like, hungry people, and clothe a few naked people, and invite people into your home, then everything will go great. Like, it's no, it's actually still going to be hard. It's still going to be life on planet Earth. It's still going to be challenging. There's still going to be the temptation to demonize other people and to get ahead and to, you know, all this other stuff. And so, like, but if you keep at it and keep at it and keep at it, like, the renewing waters will be there, because you're staying in the flow of generosity. You're staying in the flow of seeing people as fully human, and not just a problem, or not just a crime. You're seeing them for, who they are. And Lisa, it's interesting. You were talking about that whole psychology thing of, you kind of become the 5 people that you're closest to. So you better surround yourself with good people, right? There's nothing wrong with that psychology, right? That, like, that's those studies are real, and they're true for a reason, right? We actually do end up bearing some of the characteristics of the people that we're closest to. We rub off on each other. We're human. It's pretty normal. I would actually say that that's one of the beautiful things about you, is that you are around not just the most wealthy and privileged people in the world, and choosing for them to rub off on you, but you have chosen who you associate with. And what's actually really beautiful is they've rubbed off on you. Like, and they've made you into the kind-hearted, determined person that you are, that seeks justice. And I don't think that's because you're not in community with them. I think it's because you're in community and you've chosen that community. And so it's like another example of, we have this fear that if we go down this path, that, well, if I associate myself with those people, then I'm going to be corrupted too. And it's like, or you may rub off on each other and become a better human being in the process.
I feel like it doesn't get any easier when you do it. It actually gets more difficult and more complex, because you get to understand more and more dimensions to humans.
Mm,
And humans are really complex. And
yeah.
the whole life is hard. There's a lot of stuff there. And there's a lot of, like, gosh, there's some beautiful stuff that can happen, where it does feel like it does feel like a well-watered garden.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not that I don't get frustrated. I get super frustrated with, like, the ways that when I can't find a solution, when things just have to be hard for someone, or things, yeah. And I don't feel like there's a drought there. I don't feel like I'm in a drought. I feel like actually I have all that I need, because it also
Mm-hmm.
gives me, like, a perspective on things too, and maybe that's part of this, is like, if you do all these other things, it's not that your life suddenly is like a well-watered garden. Maybe you just recognize that it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, the
Yeah.
perspective shifts to it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I was thinking about, I think kind of related to this, there's a way to read an if then statement in verse 9 where you started, that makes it sound like God's presence is conditional.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you call, God shall answer.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's actually that it's like the natural thing that you would do by the time you get to verse 9 is call out to God, because you've lived in the complicated nature of trying to do this work.
Mm.
And so you're going to call out to God, because what else are you going to do at that point? You're like, I don't know how to do this, God. The natural thing you're going to do at that point is call out to God. And when you do that, the living presence will answer, Hanani, here I am. Like, all Hanani is this word that is usually something that only humans say. And it's like, it's humans saying to God, I'm all in. What do you got for me? And verse 9, the energy is God saying, I'm all in. I'm in this with you. And I think it's because our request changes. It's not because God wasn't with us the whole time. It's there's something about verse 9 where we're like, okay, now I know what my questions are for the divine. Because this is really hard. I don't know how to provide it. And then the divine's like, I'm here. All of me's here with you. Got it. Like all in. Let's go. And then there's another sort of emphasis on breaking the yoke, of stopping speaking vanity. And then we're this well-watered garden because we've got this sort of different sort of partnership with the divine than we had before we cried out in this way, before we tried, before we started. And then we've got this guidance and we've got this refreshing thing where we're a well-watered garden. And I think maybe then God is a part, like that's a part of how we're getting back to this Eden, is that God is with us in it, and we're with God in it in a different sort of way than before we tried doing the messy work. Because I also think about the garden metaphor to say, if we are well-watered gardens, then our very being isn't just for us. Like the nature of being a garden is that you're producing flowers, you're producing fruit. Especially if we're back in the Garden of Eden, then if we're a well-watered garden, we're producing fruit that others can eat from. But we're well-watered, so that's happening naturally. And then there's something in that that allows us to be the repairers of the breach.
Well, and you brought up the idea of the if-then statements, and those are littered throughout this passage. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. But I love the way you took it, where it's less about like this deal we're making with the divine. Like, if I do this, God, then you need to do this. Like, instead, it's like, if this starts to happen, then this is then this is gonna happen. Like, it's kind of like a natural consequence of like the next thing. I do this all the time with my kids. They always want to make deals. Their kids are just constantly deal makers because they see the world in such black and white terms, right? And so, it's if I put away my shoes, then I get a piece of cake, or if I clean up my room, then we get to go do this. And if this, then this. And it's constant deals. And the thing I keep stressing to my kids is like, no, it's not if you do this, then I do that. It's if you just do this, then we all get to just live into the next part of the day, which is a lot more fun than that part of the day. It's like if we all just clean the house together and just do it, then guess what we get to go do after? We get to go mountain biking, and it's going to be so much fun. And yeah, you could see it as like, well, it kind of is the same thing, right? If they clean the room, they get to go mountain biking. Well, yeah, if you want to be overly legalistic about it, but also if we just like take care of our stuff, then we get to go enjoy our life. Like, that also is a natural flow, right? And like, if you reach out to someone and build a friendship, like, well, then they're going to be kind to you. Well, yeah, duh. Like, it's called human flourishing, right? It's if you treat someone with kindness, then you're more likely to be treated kindly, right? It's not a quid pro quo. It's just a natural evolution of seeing someone for all that they are. If I were a pastor preaching the sermon, I would say it's moving from transaction to transformation.
Okay, preacher. I think, oh gosh,
I feel like we want to be called the repairers of the breach before we do any of this shit.
Yeah.
Ooh,
say like, that again. We want God to like say, you're the repairer of the breach, go do the work, instead of like do all, like, get the stuff right. Quit doing these things.
Yeah, there's a way. Thanks, Lisa. I think like that name something I was trying to get at and couldn't find the language for, of like, there is this thing that is true but faulty, of like, put on your own mask first, right? Of like, heal yourself before you heal others, so that so that the work you're doing comes from the right place. There is truth to that. And there's also a way that can keep us from doing things that we just need to do, healed or not.
Yeah.
And that through doing those things, we will become healed. Like we want to be named repairer. We want to be named well-watered gardens so that we can go feed the poor and break the yokes. Because now I know that's my identity to do that. And I'm strong enough. I'm called to it, blah, blah, blah. Versus no, stretch out your soul to the hungry, break those yokes, call upon God because it's going to feel impossible. God will be like, I'm all in. Now you're a well-watered garden. Now you're a repairer of the breach. I'm not saying that means that our own healing work isn't important. Therapy is important. Healing that generational trauma is important. We believe in all of those things. And
get to work.
Yes. What if there's also ways we just need to get to work? Just do some stuff. Stop sitting back. Try. I was really struck by this word for when you are drawing out your soul to the hungry in verse 10, and meaning all of us, that word for draw out is puk. And it has this interesting language of like it's producing or issuing. And I'm like, what is this? Dropping but the word, it comes from this idea of like stumbling. And I actually love the idea of like stumble your soul towards the hungry, because that doesn't sound put together and like a nice plan. It's just, it has some of that energy of like, just start. Just start, just stumble, just fall into it. Like just, it doesn't have a lot of like, make a strategic plan to reach your soul out to the hungry. It's just stumble, draw out, drop in, start, try.
I mean, it's such a cliche thing to say, but we all know it's true. Like the first step is the hardest one. So yeah, stumble, just go. Just, yeah.
So we're, as we think about this being the next conversation that we've been having about gardens in scripture, where does this one feel like it's taking us in the trajectory of, maybe I'll do a little review and then we'll see where we are. So our first conversation is about being in the garden of delight, of being earth creatures from the earth, of being in this place of tending and guarding a garden that God placed us in. Then we talked about being exiled from that garden, but how that's not the same as being removed from God's presence, and how there's this evolution of thought and desire and autonomy that's happening, that we also then are, Lisa had that brilliant noticing of like, we're being put back in the dirt that we came from when we leave the garden. And what do we have to now cultivate here? And then we talked about the people of Israel when they were really inhabiting this promise, this desire. They looked like a garden to Balaam, even when they were still in the wilderness. There was a way they were inhabiting something of who they were that looked like a garden to him. And then we talked about Ahab trying to force a garden in a place that was a vineyard, and it was someone else's vineyard, and this wrestle with gardens and power. And is this going to be the kind of garden that they build in the narrow place? Or is this going to be the kind of vineyard that God asks us to cultivate for the abundance of all? And now we're in this Isaiah 58 idea of us being well-watered gardens when we're doing some stuff.
But it also feels like, stop thinking that you're the one that's in charge of watering your shit. Get outside of it. And like, it'll happen because you're doing the things that, like, this is what God has wired us for. These are the things that you are to pay attention to. Less worried about your freaking garden. That's great. You have one. I got it. Now you take care of the other things, because it's like this natural. It feels like the garden is just more of a reflection of the state of where you are. Like if your garden doesn't feel well watered, there's probably something in there. There's like something's happening. And it could be that you have a lack of communal care. That's why it doesn't feel like it's, depends on where we're sitting on the oppression spectrum.
Well, it also feels a little bit like an evolution of like how we engage with power. Whereas at the beginning, we're given a meaning and purpose, and we're stretching the limits of that, and we're finding ways to like move our meaning and purpose out back into the world. And then even when it's been really hard, we're still seen as this people that have purpose and have meaning and are moving in the right direction, even though it doesn't feel like it in the wilderness. We're still heading to what God has promised. And then we've seen the extreme of what power can do, where it can claim an unhealthy garden for its own purposes. And now in Isaiah 58, we're participating in the oppression. We're the ones with the power. And the question is, how do we use it or relinquish it or see it clearly enough to say, I've got to change. This has to be done differently. We've got to break this apart. We've got to tear this down. We've got to eliminate this. We've got to share that. We've got to bring them inside. We have to harness power differently or think of it differently so that we can re-engage our purpose and get back into this healthy flow that we were originally called to.
Mm-hmm. And that we get back to that healthy flow in Isaiah 58, not through religiosity. That's not the kind of fast God is. Like the people in Isaiah 58 are oppressors and they are religious. They are fasting. They are going to the temple. That's what they're talking about. God, we're doing all the religious things. And God's like, but you're missing the whole point. I'm found in this work with those who are oppressed. Go find me there. I'm with you there.
What do you feel like that's where you see it, Steph? Like when you think of the trajectory of study?
Yeah, well, I see, like, as I think about us moving into the New Testament as well, and some coming conversations, I think about the kinds of things Jesus says a lot, which is like, you're just looking for God in the wrong places. Like, yes, God is everywhere, that's true, but also like you're trying to get closer to God through religious action as compared to getting closer to God through human flourishing. Like this, it's towards human flourishing. It always has been about and creation flourishing. Like we were placed in a garden to tend and to guard it. What are we tending? What are we guarding? What is the flourishing that we're moving towards? And that I think that that's a big theme of the Bible is, do we understand what flourishing we're supposed to be tending and guarding?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think I've just worked with enough. I've been in enough frustrating situations with religious people being oppressors, but seeing themselves as oppressed. That to me is a message that is strong here, is like, it just feels like a lot of Christians have a martyr complex where we think we are being we think our faith is marginalized and martyred and whatever else, in a way that means that we read the story as if we are the wrong character in it. You can be really religious and really faithful and never become a garden unless you're seeing the whole of the yokes that we're supposed to break.
This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical text so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40, that's 40orchards.org. Our opening music is by LesFM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.